11th Hour on Radio Sri Lanka, the program that illustrates the rediscovery of the glitz and the glam of the nation's most prominent entertainers and eminent personalities from the corporate sector. Join us on every Mondays at 11 a.m. exclusively on Radio Sri Lanka, 97.4 and 97.6 FM island-wide. Yet another episode on 11th Hour. Conquering yourself is a very grave topic indeed. On Everest, it took many failures to make that first successful summit achievement for one to definitely make it happen. Many had to attempt multiple pioneering expeditions to the mountain, mapping out its terrain and forging new routes by trial and error to finally say it was accomplished. The obsession one would have in scaling Everest would end in tragedy and leaving many unheard incidents summing up as mysteries in climbing the peak. It's a tough climb, and the struggle to reach the high altitudes of Everest requires many, many attributes. We do have a very prominent personality today, also the very, very first Sri Lankan who climbed the Mount Everest, and I take pride in saying this, that it was a female who accomplished this mission. Of course, I take great pleasure in interviewing her today, Jayanthi Kuru-Uthumpala, where the Sri Lankan flag was raised by herself, witnessing an unspectacular view and on highest point. Greetings to you.
Thank you, Sabrina, for having me this afternoon.
Of course, yes, let's get about with the formalities. And I already feel as if I'm also at a higher altitude. Firstly, let's speak about what inspired you to carry out this task.
Well, actually, there's quite a simple response to that question. And I know it may sound like a cliche, but the absolute truth is that climbing Everest has been a childhood dream of mine. It was something that I have been wanting to do since I was 8 years old. And I do know that once I got back from Everest, some of my teachers in school also actually reminded me how I had written essays saying one day I want to climb Everest. I don't remember this, but they reminded me. And I think because climbing has been something, even from a very young age, I grew up in the Himalaya, and we were fortunate that we had a garden with trees around our house, all around. So my brother and I would be constantly climbing these trees. And for me, what I do remember is it was always just pleasurable looking at getting a treetop view from the top of, branches of trees, climbing onto the roof, etc. So in a sense, this particular journey also really the motivation was pretty much to, or the desire to do it has been something that I've wanted to do for a very long time, but never actually imagined that it could actually be possible one day.
I'm imagining you actually, most of the time either on a roof or on a higher parapet wall.
Yes.
Picturing you in such a situation.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I'll climb anything. Window grills, roof, doors, walls.
You name it.
Yeah.
Ready to take a challenge
definitely.
as well. So, getting into a bit of a serious question, Mount Everest made its cartographic debut as the world's highest mountain in 1856, and British Army officers began discussing the possibility of climbing it in the 1890s. The Royal Geographic Society and Alpine Club carried out the first expedition in 1921. 6 more unsuccessful British attempts up the northern route followed, with climbers such as Mallory and Irvine thought to have reached just shy of the summit. The following challenge might have been forging new routes to ascend the mountain. Tell us please regarding venturing into new routes in life and the connectivity towards making oneself successful.
Yes, Sabrina. So actually, in a sense, this journey, I mean, when we decided to take it on, what was really new about it was that it was new for many Sri Lankans. It was unheard of. I mean, we live on an island, and the only ice that you would find is probably in in your freezer. And so climbing a mountain with ice and snow is not in the imagination of most Sri Lankans. Now, subsequently, of course, many people, there are desires, many people sort of understand it a little bit better. But when we were looking for sponsorship, this was a huge challenge, because I think it was just a question of, why do you want to do this? What is at the top of this mountain? Or are you really crazy? Like, are you that crazy that you want to?
That was the kind of attitude.
That was the attitude. So but something, I mean, in terms of one of the reasons was also, when you forge a new path or do something out of the ordinary, out of the box, that you have to also expect people to sort of stare at you like you've grown some horns.
Out of the box when it comes to a society such as us.
Yes, in our society, where everything has to always fit into a box. And if you try to be innovative, it's not always easy. But I think that's where you need to sort of not give up and keep pushing through, keep an eye on your goal and keep pushing onwards. And also there's a lot of fear in the unknown. I mean, that of course I can speak a little bit later, but the unknown here was that there was no one else from Sri Lanka we could talk to get advice on what was it like, how difficult, how challenging. So everything had to be gathered from people outside the country, that kind of information, or from what's available online. But therefore, there were many new elements to this journey. And therefore, when anything is new, there's always the fear of the unknown. And that just adds
So apart from climbing the mountain, you had to do a lot of research.
Absolutely.
In getting advice to some kind of, it basically, whatever that is required for a professional representation.
Yes. And not only the research, but the practical training. So, I mean, I was fortunate because in 2003 and 4, I was able to do 2-month-long mountaineering courses in the Indian Himalayas, which taught me all the basics in terms of technical ice climbing, how to rescue someone from a crevice, how to look after your body at high altitude, because the higher you go, there's less oxygen. So how do you stay alive on the mountain and not sort of succumb to low oxygen, low pressure, etc., which can be fatal. All of this can lead to high altitude sickness, which is fatal. And all of that helped. But in addition to that, I think just when you try to speak to people in Sri Lanka, there were challenges. Also, there was judgment on by either my gender or my size in terms of, how do you think you can do this? And a lot of doubt in terms of, nobody in Sri Lanka has done this. So, what
honestly,
makes you think?
There's a physical requirement to climb a mountain. I mean, should you be like a very tall personality, well built? I mean, that's the kind of image anyone would get at.
Well, that's a stereotype. And I think that's the problem with stereotypes, that they're not true. I am definitely not a tall person. I'm 5 foot 1.5 inches. So I think I'm tall, but definitely not tall in this any scheme of comparison. But I did climb Mount Everest, and that just goes to show that it's not only your physical strength that's required, it's also your mental strength. That's hugely important.
I'm sure you can connect this experience that you gathered with a corporate employee as to how should they be focusing in their career goal.
Yes,
in a similar platform.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. So in many ways, I guess one would be, there's always a planning and preparation stage with anything we do. And for me, again, the planning preparation stage, for Everest, I would go back to 13 years of having done those courses, but also then wherever I would go overseas, seek it out, do it as a hobby. And I was only doing this recreationally. Climbing is not my job. So in a sense, but you find the time, if it is your passion, then you find the time to learn, teach yourself, improve your technical skills, knowledge, etc. That's one, the planning. Secondly, also then, I think as a woman, one of the biggest challenges always is, how do you challenge these stereotypes, and the gender stereotypes particularly? Because I know that before climbing Everest, there were many comments about, why is she doing this? My climbing partner, Johan, had been asked, why are you going with a woman? She will fail, you will also fail, right? Especially when nobody else has done this in Sri Lanka.
A very motivational phrase.
Yeah, exactly. So that's easy to get discouraged, right? But I think, and then even after coming back from Everest, I would constantly be introduced as the first Sri Lankan woman to climb Everest. And I would correct people, and in fact my friends would also correct them, saying, actually she's the first Sri Lankan person. Because once again, when you say first Sri Lankan woman, yes, when you say first Sri Lankan woman, there's an assumption that a man climbed Everest before, right? And
that's
that is
the
not
idea
the case.
You would get.
Exactly. So no one's going to say first Sri Lankan man to climb Everest, right? So I guess these are the stereotypes. I mean, there were many. For another example could be that when Johan and I mean, he had to turn back on his first attempt, and he had the courage to do that. And I have a lot of respect for him for having turned back on his first attempt. He went back 2 years later and completed the journey. But when he was going back, he was asked that whether he had sacrificed his oxygen cylinder to me, and that's why I made it. So again, there's an impossibility to understand that a woman could do something. Not even uncertainty. I think it's almost like people can't believe or fathom that a woman could do something before a man. There must have been something else, like he would have had to sacrifice his cylinder, right?
There is an untold story.
Yeah, so these are the stereotypes that I think as women, particularly in the corporate world, that we need to challenge, because there are many barriers that we come across,
Of course.
which are beyond our control, but it's also about questioning those barriers and breaking those stereotypes and creating new norms that can help all of us as women and help the next generation too. And the stereotypes affect men and boys too, and that's important. So not only women should be challenging these stereotypes, men too need to question them and challenge them and change them.
True enough. The Everest could be placed as a testing ground for a person's limits as well. Speak to us about being strategic in attempting this uphill task.
So being strategic was critical if you wanted to come back down alive. That's one of the main goals, was not just to climb the mountain, but come back alive in two pieces separately, Johan and myself, or in one whole piece, let's say. And one way of being strategic was having a very thorough risk mitigation strategy. Because one of the biggest challenges on Everest is that you could lose your life. It is a mountain that has taken many lives. In fact, close to the summit, there are almost 200 dead bodies of climbers who never made it. And also climbers who never turned back when they should have turned back. So the ego gets the better of you very often. Your ego can come in the way of you sort of staying alive. So in terms of a risk mitigation strategy, again, trying to understand what are the risks involved and how do you mitigate that. So if, for example, if extreme cold, temperatures as low as minus 60 degrees Celsius could result in you not having, if you don't wear correct gloves or good adequate gloves or the correct kind of clothing and the correct kind of boots, you could get frostbite on your fingertips, on your toes, which means that you would have to amputate your fingers. That I didn't want happening, obviously. None of us do. So then how do you find which brand do the reviews, which company do you go with which mountaineering company? Because it was important, as I said, not to just go with any mountaineering company. We wanted a team that would tell us to turn back if they felt our life was in danger, right? Not to climb at any cost, which could mean you lose your life. So it was really doing a lot of research, and that's also linked to the planning stage, but investing in the correct kind of equipment. So you can buy cheaper gear, but it may not protect you. So if you know that this is the terrain that has all these risks, how do you then invest correctly, do the reviews, find which equipment, which brands, why this brand and not that brand? I remember preparing a sort of a 10-page gear list of each item, each brand, which size, which type within the sub-brand within that, to make sure everything had to be perfect. And that was really important. So I think even when we talk about strategies in our life, there are multiple strategies we sort of have to embrace. But sometimes if you know you're going into something where there are risks involved, I'm not saying don't do it. We need to all take risks at some point. That's important.
Certainly.
To live. But then how do you make sure that you are prepared to face whatever eventuality?
And also do not expect anyone to always come and tell you what is required. Do your own research.
Absolutely. Of course, absolutely. You have to. Yes.
True enough. Edmund Hillary once remarked, "I feel sorry for today's climbers trying to find something new and interesting to do on the mountain, something that will get both the public attention and the respect of their peers. Up and down the mountain in 24 hours, a race to the top, what will they think of next?" I'm sure you would have a summarization towards this point, especially towards climbers who would focus on this on a serious note.
Yes, I know it is quite sad that today sometimes people maybe perhaps are doing things not for the right reasons, and I think that can be really problematic. Now, in my case, I definitely did not climb Everest to become the first person. That was not my goal. My goal and my dream was to climb the mountain, because I've always wanted to climb this mountain, and come back down safely. And then, of course, there's a phrase in Nepali where they say the mountain chooses you. You cannot choose the mountain. And for all these reasons, but in terms of like, I'm grateful that the mountain gave me that chance to climb up and come back down safely. But it's important that when we choose a goal, we're doing it for the right reasons, because we love doing it, simply put. Not because we want to be famous or we want money or something else.
A genuine passion.
A genuine passion. And if you actually do something that you enjoy doing, you will become good at it. You will be happy, right? Because money can't buy us happiness. Neither can, fame. And possibly some amount of happiness with money, of course, in a crisis like this. But definitely
on another note,
not the deeper level of happiness. I think that's why I always say, despite our busy work schedules, always find the time to do something that you enjoy doing, because that is what really, for me, I mean, I still climb. I climb rocks, I climb frozen waterfalls.
Still you continue it.
I continue it because it's something I love doing, and but I have to take time off work. I have to take leave. If I need to go on no pay leave, I will do that.
Pre-plan.
Plan it, pay for it, etc. So there's a lot involved, but I'm doing it because it makes me happy, and that's important. Yeah.
Climbing mountains and overcoming obstacles is certainly not the same interpretation, even though some could say that overcoming obstacles is compared in that manner, which is certainly just another way of describing life. Let's dive deeper into how one should attune themselves to scale up the greatest mountain of them all. That's Everest. Please.
Yes, so absolutely I agree with you that our life can also be tougher than climbing Mount Everest, and we all have metaphorical Everests that we have either climbed and continue to climb in our life.
Or stuck somewhere.
Yes, or stuck at a certain camp and unable to proceed upwards.
Mentally dead.
Yeah, absolutely. Mental burnout, fatigue happens all the time. I think it's important, what I have learned and what I believe in is that very often what prevents us from going on to another stage or going beyond is a fear of failure. We're scared that we won't be able to do this, and then what will people say, right? We are scared that it just won't go according to plan. And of course, nothing goes according to plan. That's life. But what I've learned is, and even the sports I do in rock climbing, it still scares me, the kind of climbing that I do. It's always scary, but I do it because I push myself. It forces me to get out of my comfort zone. And that's important, because it's only when we need to also embrace things that scare us. Because only if we resist that fear, then it just makes everything much more harder. So my fear on Everest was actually losing my life. Death on the mountain is a reality, as I said before. I even wrote my last will before I went. But I had to climb this mountain. I had to do it. And I think if I resisted that fear, I would have just been paralyzed, literally and metaphorically frozen. But it was important to embrace the fear. And I mean, I would joke to myself saying that if I died on the mountain, at least I would have a good view. That was what I would tell myself. But I also believe that embracing the fear, that's how we can grow as individuals, because we learn something about ourselves that we never knew we could do before. And until we try. So if fear prevents you from doing something, I would say, just talk yourself into it. Try once, try twice, try 10 times. And if you still feel it's not for you, then give up. But don't give up before you actually try.
So nature didn't give up on you, Jayanthi. That
Definitely
is why you
not.
came back and you're relating this beautiful unspoken view to us.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, nature does not discriminate, as I always say.
Would never.
Never.
Teamwork was considered supremely important to climb Everest. Certain veterans used each climbing team as a chess grandmaster that might deploy pieces on a board, deploying them based on their strengths and weaknesses to establish a series of ever higher footholds on the mountain. How could you relate to this, and what sort of a master plan did you implement?
Well, teamwork, again, absolutely essential for a peak such as Mount Everest or many other challenges that one would take on. But particularly, I think for Everest, definitely we had a team. And I would say multiple layers of teams. So Johan and I were a team, of course, right, as my climbing partner. And then, but in addition to Johan, there was also the mountaineering company that we went with for all the logistics, the guiding advice, they are the ones who provided even the oxygen cylinders that we used. And it was important to be able to trust your team. And on Everest, beyond base camp, you actually climb on a 1-to-1 guide ratio. So each climber is climbing with a high altitude Sherpa guide. Sherpas are the Nepali people from Nepal. And they're very strong. But I mean, how do you suddenly trust someone that you've just met? And I think for me, when I was introduced to my guide, I actually asked him how many years experience he had climbing Everest. And when he said 14, I could relax instantly, because I knew that if he said run, I would run. If he said jump, I would jump, because of the experience. And he had climbed Everest 4 times before that time. With me, it was his 5th time on the summit. So I think, and then that was another layer of the team, the guides, the mountaineering company. We had a team of 6 friends who were back here in Sri Lanka who just believed in us and supported us and helped us with all the media publicity. We would send little voice notes and photographs, and they would help get it out to the broader public here. Our team of sponsors, once again, it was a huge expense, and we could not have done this alone. So the team of sponsors also was part of our team, because without that support, and once again, just to say that right in the beginning, there were many who just did not believe in our dream. And then others came on board from the corporate sector. We are very grateful to them, who actually decided to believe in this. Nobody had done it in Sri Lanka, and there was a risk involved.
Of course.
And they were willing to take that risk. And I admire that. And that's also that. So all the sponsors also make up another team. And of course, our friends and family who just cheered on, and the general public here. We would get sort of messages. Our team of 6 friends who were in touch with us would send like screenshots of messages on Facebook, etc., cheering us on, and that was all supporting, helping us on a day-to-day basis.
Teams branching out in different directions.
Yes, so that's why it's a huge team effort. It's definitely not a single journey or a solo summit or solo journey at all. So I think teamwork is essential for everything we do, because we're not sort of born in isolation. We as human beings, we are dependent on each other for many things. We are also independent, but working together, collaborating is always essential in many things that we do. That's what I believe in.
So adjust and move forward.
Absolutely, yes.
Let's speak about one of your special projects. So the internet should be fun and a safer platform for us all to access, but regrettably, many feel unsafe online. Speak to us with regard to this initiative that you have taken on an exclusive project that says delete nothing.
Yes.
Tell us more.
Thank you, Sabrina. So Delete Nothing is actually a web-based platform which is trilingual, which aims to do 2 things. One is it aims to document online gender-based violence in Sri Lanka. And secondly, it provides resources for people who are affected by online gender-based violence in terms of how to get help, how to stay safe online, etc., also in 3 languages. So I'll quickly speak about the first part, documenting, and why that's important. Because at the moment, there isn't enough data in the country which talks to us to give us a better picture of who is most affected. What we do know is that mostly women and girls are the ones who are most affected. But we need to also understand who are the perpetrators, what are the responses that are available, what services are out there, are they effective, are they not. We also hear anecdotally that there is a lot of victim blaming that happens, and that doesn't help with this kind of problem. So we're trying to also understand and get a better picture. So on the Delete Nothing website, you can actually share your experience if you have experienced this, and we don't save your personal information, of course, but you can support us in terms of trying to help us with that, with more data to help improve the system, right? And as part of Delete Nothing, we also actually recently collaborated with the hashtag generation to set up an ecosystem of support, which is called Pratya. Under Pratya, there is also a hotline, and the number is 0777 955 900, where you can get free support on trilingual support, again, on either tech support, if you have a photograph somewhere on a website, to take it down, or legal aid, you want a lawyer to help you get through some case or a difficult situation you're in, or even if you want to speak to a therapist, there are therapists that they can refer to. So the hotline is run by hashtag generation and operated by them. And then resources is run, it's basically on the Delete Nothing website. So you can go to www.deletenothing.org, which has all the resources of where to get help, which, and many other hotlines also that we have noted down, and whom to call for help, and how to stay safe online, because that's essential. We are all online and offline on a regular basis, so we can't say online is separate to offline. And
you cannot isolate
you
it
can't
as
separate it. Exactly. Yeah.
Of course, I wish you all the very best for a very, very innovative and a very timely project.
Thank you.
So as we conclude 11th hour, multiple teams set off to try and climb the summit from all the parts of the globe. I was certainly privileged to speak to Jayanthi Kuru-Uthumpala, who brought in great news to Sri Lanka about climbing Everest, the rock, ridge graceless against the blue sky, a mission which is hard and enigmatical rather, as ever to ascend. So the very first Sri Lankan who climbed Mount Everest was with me here today on 11th hour. Thank you so much for connecting.
Thank you so much, Sabrina, for having me. Such a pleasure. Thank you.
Certainly the pleasure is mine as well. And Sabrina Zawahid signing off from 11th hour.